Want to welcome you back to the allocation of support departments and joint costs. And on this video, we're going to cover joint costs. And now what joint costs are, you have one process that you end up with several products and they share a common cost. And an example I have is apples, because with apples you have different grades of apples that are used for various food products. And some apples are sold as whole apples, some are sold as baking apples, some are canned, some as applesauce. So that's the example we're going to have here. Now, because the joint cost, we have several different ways we can do it. We can do a single rate method, we can do the physical unit method that's based on weights, net realizable value method, and the net realizable value based on the sales price is split off, which is probably what I'll do there. And that's surprising you have a split off price. Okay, so here's what our apples are sold for. Okay, the whole apples sell for $1.60 a pound, and we get 6,500 pounds. Baking apples, we get 23,000 pounds, and they're 95 cents a pound. The canned apples is 15,500 pounds at 65 cents a pound. That's our market value. And the applesauce, that's the cheapest one, is 32,500 pounds, and they get 40 cents. Okay, to come up with a single rate, equal round. Take the cost, 34,875, divide it by the total pounds that we have, and we want to go to 2 decimal places because we want the nearest cent, and that gives us 45 cents a pound. Okay, that comes up with our single rate. Then we copy our single rate here. Make sure you absolute value that one because we want to copy it down. 45 cents for all of them. So then we take the rate times the pounds that we have. So we take 6,500 times 45, then 23,000 times 45, 15,500 times 45, and 32,500 times 45. And if we add those up, that gives us 34,875. Okay. So that's how much joint costs are going to be allocated to each of those types of apples. Whole apples is going to receive $2,925 of joint costs. Baking's $10,350. Applesauce, you see, get $14,625. So a good portion of the joint cost is going to the applesauce. Now, the problem you have with that, the applesauce is the least valuable resources, and that's not what we're really growing the apples for. And that's the downside of the single rate, is that the one that produces the most apples or the most product gets the bulk of the joint costs. And that may not be, with applesauce, we may not be spraying so much. We may not want to use as much fertilizer if we were just trying to raise applesauce apples. So we're trying to raise the whole apples or baking apples, and that's what we're trying to do. So a way around that is based on the pounds that they produce. So if we do that, you bring the pounds down, equal round. In this case, we have the 6,500 for the whole apples out of the total 77,500, comma, we'll go 3 decimal places. So that's 8.4. Okay. Now, that's our percentage of total pounds. Then what we would do is we want the cost is still 34,875. So we would take equal the 8.4% for the whole apples. Let's do it this way. Let's do a round. I always forget that. 8.4 times 34,875, absolute value of that. And we want to go to the nearest whole dollar, so it's 0. So that gives us 29.30. And then what we'll do is we'll copy that down. Take each of the percentages times the 29.7 times 34,875, 20% times that, and 41.9% times that. And that gives us our numbers here. If we add these up, then you see that we're off $1. We take the largest one, and what we'll do is we'll subtract $1 from that. Now here again, it makes a little bit of difference, not a whole lot, because our poundage is based pretty much on the same thing. It's a little bit different. Whole apple's got a little bit more, 23,000, 10,358, 69.75. Then the canned and applesauce got a little bit less. Okay, that's based on physical units. So net realizable value. This is based off sales prices split off. This is probably the fairest one to do, if possible. First thing you do is then we'll take the 6,500 times the market value of $1.60, gives you 10,400. You multiply the market value times the pounds that you actually produced off of each of them. And then the total market value is we add all those up. That gives us $55,325. Then what we'll do is we'll take the equal, I'm going to do the round function again, the 10,400 divided by the total value, and again we'll go to 3 decimal places, and that gives me 18.8%. And I'll copy all that down. So you'll take 21,850 divided by 55,325, gives you 39.5. Then you take 10,075 times 18 divided by 18.2. Take 10,075 divided by 55,325 gives you 18.2. And then you take 13,000 divided by 55,325, and that gives you 23.5%. And again, our total has to equal the 34,875, because that's what we have there. So we'll take equal, round, take the 18.8% times the 34,875 absolute value, and again we want 0 decimal places, so that gives you 65.57. And then you take the 39.5 times 34,875, it gives you 13,776, and then you have 18.2% times this 34,875 gives you 63, and the 23.5 times 34 gives you 81.96. Now the thing is, if you add these up, you see that you're off $1. So in this case, the baking apples is the largest one. So we just simply subtract $1, so we get 34,875 from that. Okay, that's the net realizable value method. Now, process further or sell it split off. You compare the prices. See how much do you have in there? How much is it going to? How much can you sell it for presently? Or do you process it further? And then you take, how much is it going to cost you to process further? And that's what you want to do. You want to compare the additional revenue generated by the additional costs. If the revenue outweighs the cost, you process it further. Okay. Then the other thing we'll talk a little bit about is accounting for byproducts. A byproduct is something that's produced that's insignificant. Like when you have a lumber yard, you produce sawdust. Sawdust you may be able to sell, but it's a byproduct. So it's not a high value type of thing. There's 2 ways you can do it. One is that you take the value of the byproduct and you reduce it to the joint cost by it. So if applesauce was a byproduct, or I guess that wouldn't be byproduct, but the joint cost in this case was $34,875. If you had a byproduct of $2,000 or $500, let's say $500, then you would actually allocate $34,375 instead of the $875. That's one way of doing it. Okay. The other way of doing it is just have the $500 as other revenues and then allocate the $34,875 like you normally do. So you just debit your byproduct or your inventory and credit other revenue for byproduct. And that's a way of doing it also. Okay, so that is the joint costs, and that finishes up this chapter.